Okay, so let's start with a big question. What if the money we're using to fund our most important institutions actually made them stronger over time, instead of weaker? Well, that's the core idea behind a really interesting framework we're going to explore today, regenerative capital theory.
So, to get why we even need a new approach, we've got to first take a hard look at the tools we're using right now and see why they, so often, just don't cut it.
I mean, this question feels painfully familiar, right? These are the absolute pillars of our society, and they seem to be constantly in a state of financial panic. And it turns out this isn't some accident. Nope. It's a direct result of the kinds of funding they're basically forced to rely on.
Just think about it for a second. Debt demands these rigid, predictable payments, but the world, it's anything but predictable. So for a hospital trying to deal with a pandemic or a university with enrollment that goes up and down, that fixed payment becomes this huge weight, systematically making them weaker and more fragile year after year.
Then you've got equity. Now, equity is the engine that drives the commercial world, for sure. But it's fundamentally totally incompatible with public good missions. Why? Because it requires selling off ownership and promising a cut of future profits. And those are two things a public school or community health clinic just can't and shouldn't do.
And finally, grants. Look, grants are absolutely essential, but they are one and done. A grant gets spent, it creates one single cycle of impact, and then poof, the capital is gone. It helps in the moment, but it can't build a lasting, resilient financial foundation. It's a Band-Aid, not a cure. Okay, so if debt, equity, and grants all have these, fatal flaws for public good institutions, then what's left? What's the alternative? Well, the source material we're digging into today proposes a fourth category, a whole new ballgame.
And this is the big idea, the core definition. This is not just a small tweak on what we already have. It's a totally different logic. Just look at the key phrases here. Preserves principle, multi-cycle, no extractive burdens. This is capital that's designed to renew itself, not to run out.
Yeah, this visual just lays it all out, doesn't it? Take a look. Debt and equity, extractive. Grants, they deplete the principal. Only regenerative capital, right there in green, gets a thumbs up on all the good stuff. It's not a mix of the others. It really isn't a category all its own.
So how does this actually work in the real world? What does it even mean for capital to regenerate? Okay, let's get into the mechanics and see how this thing actually builds on itself.
This quote from the source material really just nails the whole philosophical shift here. Traditional finance is so often a one-way street, where value is just flowing out of an institution. This new model, it's all about creating a circular flow that builds up that institution's capacity with every single cycle.
Okay, so here's the cycle. It's actually pretty straightforward. An institution gets some capital, let's say to buy a critical piece of medical equipment. It uses that equipment, creating social value. Then, instead of that money just being gone forever, the institution returns the principal over time through a really soft, mission-aligned obligation. And then that same capital goes right back into the pool, ready to be deployed again for the next institution or the next project. Now, the real magic of this system, the thing that makes it so powerful, it all comes down to one key number, the recycling rate. We'll just call it R. A grant has an R of 0. That money is never coming back. But the second R is anything above 0. The whole system starts to compound, creating way more value from the same initial pot of money. And this chart, wow, this shows you the incredible power of that compounding effect. A single-use grant, in gray, has a value multiplier of 1.7, which, isn't terrible. But just look at those green bars representing regenerative capital. Even at a 50% recycling rate, it's already better. And as that rate gets closer and closer to 100%, the value created just explodes. It's a completely different kind of economic engine. All right, so we've got this new mechanism, but what does that really mean for the institutions themselves, day in and day out? Well, this is about changing their entire future trajectory.
For me, this is one of the most powerful images in the whole thing. The red line, that's the story we all know too well. It's the fate of an institution funded by that old extractive capital. Every crisis, every economic shock, it gets knocked down a little bit further, just compounding that fragility over time. But then you have the green line. That's the regenerative path. With each cycle, the institution gets stronger, building resilience. It's literally a story of two completely different futures.
And if that visual tells the story, this table basically shows you the math behind it. It boils that whole story down to cold, hard logic. When you just look down the columns, you can see that only the regenerative model gets a yes on every key dimension. It preserves the principle, it's multi-cycle, and it's designed from the ground up to strengthen the whole system.
So, this isn't just some abstract theoretical exercise. If this kind of capital logic were actually adopted more widely, it could totally change how we tackle some of our biggest, most complex collective challenges.
I mean, just let your mind run with this for a second. Imagine funding for climate adaptation that doesn't just bury developing nations in debt, or a permanent, self-sustaining capital base for crucial but unprofitable scientific research, a way to fund the open-source software that basically runs the internet without having to rely on unpredictable donations. The possibilities are just vast because so many of our critical systems fit this model. They need capital, but they don't generate profit.
And that's really the question this whole thing leaves us with, isn't it? It completely reframes the problem. Instead of asking, how do we pay for this? It asks, how do we build a system that pays for itself over and over and over again? It's a fundamental choice between a financial architecture of depletion and one of renewal.